All right, in this video, we're going to look at week 10, section 10.7. We're going to introduce the idea of imaginary numbers. This can be a very tricky section, so in addition to watching this video, I highly recommend you read the text, possibly even watch the videos in MyLab Math as well. This can be very tricky. So I started off here, I just wrote the square root of -1. What does that equal? If you think about it, squaring a number means something times itself. Now, a positive number squared is going to be positive, but at the same time, a negative number is also positive. So how do we get a negative under a radical? What do? We call that the imaginary number I. I is equal to the square root of -1. So if you see a negative under a radical, you're going to want to think about I. Now, there's one other concept in I that I want you to think about. What is I squared? Well, I squared is the square root of -1 times the square root of -1. Well, a square root squared is just the number. So I squared equals -1. This is going to come into play later, but I want to introduce it to you now. So if you see an I squared, you can think of it as -1 because it will come into play later. Now, if I were to ask you, what is the square root of -25? Well, we know the square root of 25 is 5, and since it's a negative, we're going to need the I, so we can call this 5I. So if you do a square root of a negative, do the numerical part just like you normally would, but put the I in there as well. Now, suppose we wanted to simplify. Suppose I have 2 plus the square root of -11. Well, we want to simplify this. So the 2 stays the same, plus I'm going to pull this negative out. I can rewrite this as the square root of -1 times 11. Now we know the square root of -1 is I, so we can put that out in front. We have I square root 11. Now let's try something a little bit more fun. Let's have 4I times 5I plus 8. 4I times 5I plus 8. Let's look at this real quick. 4I times 5I. Well, 4 times 5 is 20. I times I is I squared. 4I times 8 is 32I. Well, what did I say earlier? That I squared. I squared is -1. So I can write the 20 is -1 plus 32I. 20 times -1, -20 plus 32I. Now, when you write your answer, you always put the real part first and the imaginary part second. This is called a complex number. It's a complex number because it has a real part and an imaginary part. You always write the real part first and the imaginary part second. Now, let's look at one more. Let me flip the board over here. We'll look at one more. Let's look at 2 plus 9I times, how about 8 plus 5I. Now let's break this down. We're going to FOIL first, outside, inside, last. Our first, 2 times 8 is 16. Outside, 2 times 5I plus 10I. Inside, 9I times 8 will give us 72I. And then last, 9I times 5I will give us 45I squared. Now we can simplify the two middle terms like we did before. 16 plus 82I plus 45I squared. But let's remember, what can we do with this? I squared is -1. So I can rewrite this 16 plus 82I minus 45, because 45 times -1 is -45. And now we can subtract 16 minus 45. And 16 minus 45 is negative 29 plus 82i. And that's your final answer. Again, this can be tricky. This can be complicated. So if you have any questions, please ask.